Over the past few seasons, we've seen several changes in Major League Baseball in an effort to improve gameplay and the fan viewing experience. However, there is some talk that the sport can do even more to improve the game. CBS Sports Radio columnist Jack Stern believes MLB is balking at a prime opportunity for further changes, and he joins me now to discuss. Jack, what's going on, man?
Well, I'm doing fantastic, and that's because we have a full slate of spring training games today. Even though it's still technically February and March Madness still hasn't happened yet, there's something special about hearing the ball hitting the bat, watching players running around with their gloves, seeing the beautiful sunshine in either Florida or Arizona. I don't know. Being here in the Northeast, I kind of suffer from a lack of vitamin D in the winter, and now I feel like we're finally getting it again, even if it is indirectly.
It is indirectly, because I feel like I hear all that and it makes me say, I wish I was there enjoying some of the warmer weather. But here we are. We're going to talk about some baseball. And Jack, it's an interesting conversation, I think, when you talk about Major League Baseball, because the sport has decreased in popularity among younger demographics. But according to Forbes, the sport made a record-setting $10.8 billion in 2022. So considering that the sport is still highly profitable, do you think Commissioner Rob Manfred sees the need for further changes in baseball?
No, and that's the problem. Even though the viewing product is very bad for the most part, because you have a couple of really good teams, a couple teams that are kind of in the middle in no man's land, and then about a fourth of the league that's wholly non-competitive for the majority of the season, at the end of the day, that's not really impacting their revenue stream. They still have the older demographic tuning in. The diehards still like watching games, so they're not really losing a lot of people. The only problem is they're not bringing in the next generation. Obviously, as time goes on and the years pass by, that's going to start to become a lot bigger of a problem because they're going to have trouble retaining people. But for the time being, it's not really an issue because of how successful and how good of a job the game is doing. Speeding up pace of play helped immensely, and we'll touch on that in just a second as well. But the issues that have plagued baseball, namely the salary cap and the issues with umpiring as well, which have seen the potential implementation of robot umpires, are not necessarily things that the game feels pressure to use because they don't really improve the desirability and the watchability of the sport itself.
Yeah, and I always find it interesting, Jack, because I think when you talk about change, sometimes you think leagues and businesses would want to try to get ahead of things, and I think that's some of what you're talking about here, but we're not seeing that. So let's talk about some of those changes, right? For years, some fans have had frustrations with the inconsistency of umpires calling balls and strikes, and robotic umps, as you mentioned before, they've been used by all 30 AAA teams. Is it time for robot umpires to get the call up to the big leagues?
You know, I could have made an argument that it was time 5 years ago. I think we're long overdue for the robot umpire. Why is it that Major League Baseball decided to implement instant replay, yet they did not decide to have robot umpires or even the ability to challenge balls and strikes? That was something that was completely off limits, yet somehow it's a lot more impactful on the game than safer out calls, and that's really what upsets me the most, right? In my article, I talked about how umpires make a mistake roughly 12% of the time. X number of the times that they do make said mistakes, they happen in critical junctures of the game where a team is trying to rally back or hold a lead, and it's really impacting the final outcome. That's what I don't like. That's why we need robot umpires. And given that the system has been tested both in the Arizona Fall League and now in AAA last season as well with very few hiccups at all, there's really no excuse not to be using it at this point in time.
And Jack, that's the thing that got me, because when you look at the numbers and the testing, there haven't been much issues in terms of it, and there's no real reason I've seen that why it couldn't be implemented in Major League Baseball. So it's very interesting there. Another major issue, if you want to call it that, in baseball is the spending gap between teams, which has been increasing, with another belief that the competition gap has also widened. Is it time for Major League Baseball to implement a salary cap?
Well, this is kind of a difficult situation for Major League Baseball because if you implement a salary cap, all of a sudden, certain players aren't going to be able to make as much money. I don't know anyone, not the president of the Players Union and Tony Clark, or any of the players who would be willing to sign up for that. Now, with that being said, maybe you could get creative in trying to close that talent gap a little bit by saying teams need to be required to spend $100 million or so. The issue right now is that there's no floor and there's no ceiling. So some owners are saying, you know, I really care about the team. I want to win a lot of games. I'm in this to get a championship, so I'm going to spend $400 million on my payroll each season, and I'm going to spend 60 to 100 million on, say, 2 or 3 players. Then you have teams like the Oakland Athletics who are spending $30 million a year. They're trying to cut costs as much as possible, and they really don't care about being competitive because it's not going to help them financially. And that's where baseball's run into a little bit of a tough situation where there's really no way out right now with the way things stand, right? Because teams are not going to slow down their spending, and then the teams that don't want to spend are not all of a sudden going to decide to open up their checkbook. So until baseball says that we're going to end this, this is just the way that it's going to be moving forward. And it's a big problem, right? Because as I mentioned earlier, roughly a fourth of the league is pretty much out of contention once you get to June or July. Not only is that unhealthy for the fans who really enjoy watching the games, but it's also unfair and gives an extreme competitive advantage to the teams that are in pennant chases that are looking to fatten up down the stretch and win a lot of games, right? I mean, when you look at the Diamondbacks, for example, last year, they won 83 games, but X number of them were against the Royals, the Pirates, the Rockies. And if you take those out of the schedule, they're probably not making the postseason at all, which is really unfair.
Yeah, there's definitely an imbalance there, and I wonder if we don't talk about a cap, is there some sort of salary floor, which at least you feel like that possibly could help baseball. And Jack, we can talk about these changes and even acknowledge historically the sport has been slow when it comes to change. Do fans actually want these changes that we talked about, and how likely do you think it is that any of the changes that we discuss actually happens in, let's say, the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, the first part of that question is kind of funny because I don't think if you ask Dodgers or Yankees fans if they wanted any of these changes, they would be in favor of it, right? They're content watching their team beat the living crap out of the bad teams in the league on a yearly basis. That's helping ticket sales and helping boost the morale of those fan bases, even though the postseason is a complete crapshoot, as we've learned the past couple of years anyway. So spending $500 million and winning 110 games doesn't really matter at the end of the day because you could still lose to a team that went 500. That's a discussion for another day. But, you know, I think the thing is, of the changes that we've discussed, the robo-umpires are most likely at some point in time. That's the one that the fans are going to push for the most because they're tired of sitting on the couch and moaning and groaning every time there's a strike 3 call that's slightly off the plate or a pitch with 2 strikes that's in the strike zone that's blatantly not called. The sad reality of the situation is that as long as umpires are human beings and there's a person standing back there making the decisions, there's going to be a very high probability for error. And as Major League Baseball looks to strive for perfection in that regard, that's obviously probably going to be the biggest priority. A salary cap, a salary floor, it's fun to talk about those things, but I don't really see that being part of the near-term future.
All right, interesting stuff to see. Jack Stern with a fantastic column on CBSSportsRadio.com about baseball, balking on the opportunity to have more change within the sport. We'll see if any of these changes come about in the near future. Check out Jack Stern and his work. Jack, always good to talk to you. I know you're excited about the spring training baseball, real baseball, games that count. That's coming soon. I know you'll be excited about that. Thank you, man.
Oh, I sure am. Thanks for having me, Dexter.